All right. Good evening, everybody. It's been a long day for some here in the room. We have a very cozy room now. I hope for a great debate. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the fourth edition of the Young Security Conference's side event at the Munich Security Conference. My name is Moritz Flössler. I am the co-founder of the Young Security Conference, and I'm delighted to host our panel titled Doomed to Dependence, Evaluating Great Power Competition over Emerging Defense Technologies and the Risk of EU Irrelevance. A long title, a lot to talk about, especially after this week. And I'd like to thank first and foremost the America House for having us again. I'd like to thank the Friedrich Naumann Stiftung for their support in organizing the event. And obviously I'd like to thank our panelists here on stage, to whom I'm getting in a second. Over the next 90 minutes, we'll explore the intensifying global competition over emerging defense technologies with a focus on military AI, mostly. And we'll discuss where Europe stands today and what it must do to accelerate this development while staying true to its core values. There will be 2 rounds of questions in which you can pose yours. For you here in the audience, both here and online, we're streaming this event, and there are a couple people also watching from home. To discuss our topic today, I'm joined here on stage with an outstanding and, quite honestly, really cool panel of distinguished experts in their respective fields. I want to start with my right-hand side, Thorsten, who is a co-founder and director of the Global Public Policy Institute. He brings a wealth of expertise in peace and security, as well as data and technology policy. His deep understanding of the dynamic relationship between the US, Europe, and non-Western powers will provide valuable insights into the evolving global order, and Thorsten's extensive background in foreign relations and his work within the United Nations context further enhance his ability to illuminate these complex issues. On the very opposite side here of me sits Dr. Charlotte Weil von der Ahe. She's a senior group director for government affairs at Helsing. I guess she had a pretty busy week for those who are interested in this topic, and brings a wealth of experience in political affairs with a particular focus on AI and defense technology. Charlotte holds a PhD from the University of Oxford, and her experience is invaluable to today's conversation on technological advancements in defense. Last but really not least, John Rich, here in the middle, is the newly appointed Chief Adoption Officer at the NATO Innovation Fund. He offers extensive experience in defense innovation and strategic transformation. A former senior military officer, John commanded engineering and bomb disposal units and has held key roles in UK defense strategy, crisis response, and military innovation. His leadership in these fields positions him as a key voice in shaping the future of defense technology. So a round of applause, please, everybody, for the panel here on stage. This late on a Friday night, after we had, again, quite a week and quite a day today. So let's dive right in. French President, and this might be already outdated a little bit after what happened the last days, and especially today, but French President Emmanuel Macron said on the weekend at the AI summit in Paris, addressing Europe's AI capabilities, "We are not in the race today. We have to bridge the gap within the with the United States and China on AI." The first question goes to Thorsten. From a geopolitical standpoint, why is it so important for Europe to close this gap specifically towards China?
First of all, thank you for the invitation, and schönen guten Abend. It's great to be here. Great initiative of the Young Security Conference. Thank you, Moritz, and the whole team. I think it's also great this is happening at America House, and this very building, I think, illustrates what was being trashed this afternoon by the American Vice President. There's a bit of a burning the treasure fleet moment going on in US politics right now, where all the institutions that project soft power are being discontinued, and you know, it seems to be upon the current US administration to advance far-right politics within Europe, I thought there couldn't have been a clearer message to Europe that we're increasingly on our own than a US vice president spending 95% of his speech at a security conference on cultural war, while a real war is being waged not so far away from us. So back to bridging it to Vance, because it was not just Emmanuel Macron who talked about this gap, but I think J.D. Vance gave a much better speech in Paris. I thought that was actually a speech worth listening to and taking to heart for Europeans, because if we want to be in the race, and however you think about the race for AI, this Paris summit, Vance made it clear that Europeans or everybody needs to see artificial intelligence, new technologies also as an opportunity and not just something to be regulated. And we need to marry. And I think I wouldn't subscribe to Vance's perspective wholeheartedly at the summit, but I think we do need a little bit more of that, because in order to actually advance our own interests, we need to, we should be the continent where the greatest tech talent wants to go, start their companies, work. I don't think we're the greatest continent where the greatest tech talent wants to go, or where those with the greatest ideas have the easiest access to capital, or they find the most amenable governments if they have a great idea in defense tech. And I think we need to switch gears and aspire to become that continent. And I think that gives you some of the answer to how we can close that gap, or we don't. And I don't think it means that European companies, that's a bit the dream sometimes of European sovereignty, that we need to own the whole stack and reinvent it. I talked to an American tech executive today, of course, partly for self-interested reasons, but he said, like, some of the implementation of what Europeans call European sovereignty seems to mean that you need to reinvent the wheel to then end up where the technology was 25 years ago while it's advancing fast, if you kind of reinvent it all. And AI is mostly also a tool, and a tool you can use, and you can also use it in a sovereign way in the military, but also in our core industries. And I think we haven't nearly exhausted these opportunities to become, also have a meaningful role in the AI core industry, but also to become leaders in the application and the use of artificial intelligence tools in our military, in our industries, but also in our government. I think where maybe we'll have a leapfrog moment from our fax machine to using artificial intelligence tools.
Thank you, Thorsten. I think that was already pretty interesting. And if we go a little bit further into the military part, John, how does this gap play out within the NATO defense sphere in Europe? And what specific challenges does it create for interoperability, innovation, adoption, and maintaining an advantage against potential adversaries? So a little bit more into the military sphere here in terms of that gap.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, and a huge privilege to be here. And I think it's great that we're in Munich, because we recently released a joint report by Deal Room and the NATO Innovation Fund. And Munich is, of all the cities in Europe, is the greatest investment in venture capital into defence, security and resilience, in part because of the fact that Helsing's here. But I think that's, so you are right at the heart of defence, security and resilience and deep tech venture here in Munich, which is really exciting. So thank you for allowing me to be part of it. In terms of sort of NATO perspective, I'll magnify out a little bit, if I may, because I think this bit around a race, it's not just AI. There are multiple technologies now where there is a competition and we need to be much more in it than we were. And there's a reason why, certainly I'll speak from a defense perspective because that's my background and my experience. There's a reason that we're struggling to integrate these technologies at the pace we should. And it's because we've got a system which has been designed for a previous world. And the previous world, which basically kicked off in the sort of 50s and 60s, was where you had government investment was what drove all these technologies. So if you look at the space race, if you look at what happened in nuclear energy, most of these technologies came out of government investment, which went into companies to do research and development, from which they develop products. And we've set up an industry base which relies on that business model. And the problem is that that's changed. So since then, we're now finding that the key technologies, AI being one of them, but the same with materials, the same with biotech, the research is not led by government investment anymore, it's led by private investment. And particularly if you look at AI, governments just cannot field the amount of resource that's required to even get close to what the hyperscalers can do. So we've now got a situation where this research and development is being done not with government money, but with private sector money. And we've got a system that doesn't recognize that. So we then find it very difficult to engage with it because we have a business model which is, well, we'll give you a requirement, we'll ask you to do some research and development, and we'll come and buy a product from you at the end. First of all, it's largely a hardware model that's based on, because it's tanks and ships and aircraft. And these technologies, the software ones, iterate at a pace that hardware doesn't. So you've got multiple reasons why it's very difficult to integrate these technologies into our arsenals. That's why the NATO Innovation Fund and Diana was set up, because there was a recognition, and give NATO credit, I mean, it often gets beaten up for being kind of slow and kind of ponderous. It managed to pull together in a couple of years a program of accelerators that are spread all over the NATO nations, and it pulled together a unique thing, which is a multinational venture capital fund focused on deep tech for defense, security, and resilience. I think that's an amazing achievement just of itself to pull 24 countries together. We've got €1 billion committed over 15 years to invest in these technologies. So that is a massive, massive achievement. What that allows us to do is to catalyze these markets. We invest in startups who are delivering these cutting-edge technologies. And working alongside Diana doing the accelerator allows us to start to pull these things through. And we're now working very closely with NATO to go the next step, which is then how you pull those things into full capabilities rather than just continue to sort of experiment with them. That's the way, I suppose the challenge that you see in Europe is that it's a very fragmented market. So if you look, and there was an article in the FT recently around comparing spend with Russia and Europe and how much money goes into it. Even if we spent the same amount, at the moment, the way we spend it is very, very fragmented. And we have, rather than have, and I'll give you for example, and tanks are not the specific thing that I would urge us to buy. But if you look at tanks, for example, you have 10 different sorts of things rather than consolidating around a particular model. And it's the same in the AI world. We'll have competing models from different nations. And what that means is you just don't get the efficiencies of scale of being able to do it. And you then create the problems of interoperability because you're all operating on different systems. So I think there is a moment where we can come together now and to start to standardize some of this stuff. And as I say, I'm really heartened by what I'm seeing now. The investment that's starting to go into this. 2024, over 5 billion went into venture, into these sorts of technologies. And I think that's a positive which we should celebrate.
And I think that development has gone on. I do have a question on this, but before we dive a little bit deeper into the investment side, I want to get to you, Charlotte. You had a busy week. For those again who follow what Helsing has been doing, this has been a lot has happened. And at the beginning of the week, your boss, Charlotte, the CEO of Helsing, Guntbert Scherf, said when addressing the strategic partnership between the French AI company Mistral AI and Helsing, that the international race in artificial intelligence, quote obviously, is not over yet. It has only just begun. End of quote. From a private sector perspective, what key advantages can European enterprises leverage to stay competitive in this race? And secondly, where do you see the greatest untapped potential for closing the gap with global AI leaders such as the United States and China from a private sector perspective, now from the perspective of Helsing maybe?
Thank you, happy to. So since it's quite late, I'm going to try and wake you all up by first disagreeing with both my co-panelists on two particular points. So Thorsten, and I think you'll forgive me for saying this, I completely disagree with what you said about talent not wanting to work for European companies. That is, we've made very much the opposite experience. When the company Helsing was founded, this was just post the first Trump administration, and it was before Ukraine. So you can imagine it was a very different sense of urgency when it comes to defense tech. Like, it wasn't popular, if you will, as it sort of is now. Nevertheless, at this point, the defense tech, AI-enabled strike drones, for instance, that the talent that we managed to recruit for this cause build, are now making a difference on the front lines in Ukraine. And so I can say, from those 400 people that work for Helsing, yes, it was hard work. Thorsten, I agree, convincing them. First, coming back to Europe, a lot of them had cozy jobs in Silicon Valley. And it was a hard sell at the beginning, defense tech, but it does work. It's possible. If you put your mind to it, if you really want to sort of repatriate this talent for Europe, you can. And then this, obviously, what you also need is money. That's true too. There's not that much money as maybe other countries have. But then at the same time, if you look at moments like DeepSeek, it's also clear that in this race, it's not all about money. It's about money, so I want to be clear and honest about that, but that's not the only thing that you need to build a company. And then I think when it comes, since we're talking about emerging technologies, defense technologies, we also don't have the excuse of regulation, because the AI Act and a lot of what the EU regulates doesn't regulate defense AI. Nevertheless, it is highly regulated. It is highly regulated by each national government, and as it should be, because frankly, these are systems that we use for warfare. So I would hope that no one is really looking to deregulate defense AI. I wouldn't recommend it. So what does it take for us to not fall behind? First of all, I would say we're not behind. Europe is not behind. Helsing is a prime example for us not being behind on this. So I think there's no reason to even say doomed to dependence. We work with Ukrainian technology companies in this field, and they are building these companies with bombs falling on their heads. I mean, that's a lot tougher than what we're going through here, so we're not doomed. We have everything it takes to build companies like this. And also, John, when it comes to the money, first of all, well done on Diana, amazing achievement. I think it's great, and it will kick off an even larger ecosystem to help with this. But there's a lot of money in defense. It's just not being spent on young companies. So again, I don't think Europe has or NATO has a money problem. If you're going to spend it on, other systems, then that's a strategic choice that politicians and military leaders are making every day. So if you change your choices, then maybe again you can have an impact on this ecosystem. So just a few points to maybe kick off a slightly controversial discussion, but I would say we're not doomed. B, we have everything it takes, and C, it's a matter of all of us, I think, almost just changing the attitude a bit and getting on with it.
Thank you, Charlotte, and I like it very much. If we disagree on this stage, this makes this whole debate a little bit more lively, especially at this hour. So I'm going to combine two questions for you, John, real quick here. Number one would be the money, still the money thing, and then we hop into ethics a little bit more because we have to talk about this. I want to ask you first, John, and then maybe Charlotte, you can weigh in on this a little bit after John's comment. At the Artificial Intelligence Action Summit that we had last weekend, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has launched the Invest AI initiative that wants to mobilize 200 billion euros for investment in AI, and including a new European fund of 20 billion for AI gigafactories. So John, is this really, the question now is, can you comment on this a little bit in terms of, the money missing? And then is this really moving the needle? That's basically the question here. Or should the European Union focus a little bit more on the ecosystem, especially making VC investments easier, as you also already teased before? And then again, Charlotte, a quick comment after you, John.
Wow. Okay. So
that was a lot.
First of all, I don't think we do disagree. So, well, maybe we do a bit. But I think the point is, I totally agree with your point that if we spent the money we had better, we would have better capability. I completely agree. My last job in the Ministry of Defence in the UK was as the Innovation Director. And I spent my 2 years smashing my head against the problem that I could see these technologies which were going to make a huge difference And yet we do experimentation, we do prototyping, we'd field them, the end users would say, this is exactly the thing that I want. And the companies would build up expectation in these startups, and then very quickly it would all kind of peter out. And that's because of this problem with the system that I mentioned earlier, because the system is not configured to either spirally develop things because it wants to set a requirement and then hold someone to account for delivery against that exact requirement, against an exact amount of money, normally on something around a kind of cost plus model. That does not work if you're trying to do technology, and particularly if you're trying to do software technology. So I absolutely agree that if we spent the existing money we had better, we would get more for it. I personally believe, I think there should still be more money going into defence generally. So that's on that side. And I think, so are we moving the dial? We need, there's two, let's think about the money in two chunks. One is around the money, like the venture money we're putting in, which I think is incredibly important in giving these startups access to finance to allow them to start growing. And it needs to go all the way through. So it's not enough. I think the European market is actually okay in terms of seed, Series A, Series B. A lot of these companies then struggle to get those the big lumps of cash they need to then scale beyond that. And being frank, they also struggle because and I've spoken to startups who have been told, I know you started that defense contract, I'm afraid you can't bank with us anymore. So we still have banks who will debank people who are trying to do the best they can to protect all of us by generating products for defense and security. And that just seems entirely wrong to me. So there's something around the ability to access finance, particularly scaling, and there's something around their ability to work with the financial system, whether it's around just simple banking or to get loans or whatever else. So there's some stuff there. I think that one of the key purposes of the NATO Innovation Fund is to demonstrate this is a market that is worth being in. So that's one of the reasons it was set up, to say we're going to put €1 billion into this fund, and we're going to demonstrate that at the end of the 15 years of this fund, that is a good return, because that's how you demonstrate to the markets, and that's how you pull it in. And then I think that will, I sometimes worry that the constraints that people see out there, particularly around things like ESG, are not invented, but they're an excuse rather than the reason. I think when the market starts to demonstrate this is a valuable thing to be in, I think we'll find more comes in and some of these constraints will drop. And that is not to belittle ESG, because I think it's incredibly important. I think it's just, in some ways, is being misused to prevent people investing in these things. Which I think brings me sort of neatly to the kind of ethics. Thank goodness, for the last 80 plus years, warfare has actually been regulated. And I know people break those regulations, but the British Army, of which I was a part, was very clear about our ethical and our legal responsibilities. And there are a series of very significant constraints that are put on what you can do, the sorts of weapons you can use, because there was a recognition that winning badly is morally wrong and puts you on the back foot, and the very cause you're undermining the very cause you're fighting for. And those constraints need to exist in software. I think the challenge is trying to keep legislation at pace with the technology developing so quickly. And I think that's very much the case in AI. I do worry about how quickly our adversaries are, the capabilities they're developing, and the fact that they will not necessarily have the same ethical frameworks. And I think we need to think really carefully now. We need to play forward into a future where we're in a conflict with an adversary that does not have these ethical challenges, and we need to think really clear-eyed now about what sort of safeguards we put in place on our side and preserve our ability to win, but win properly under those kind of ethical barriers.
Thank you, John. And before we continue a little bit the debate on ethics, I quickly want to get you again here in, Charlotte, on the 200 billion by the European Union Invest AI. Just a quick comment in response to John.
I would say, obviously, at the end of the day, it matters on which companies this kind of money goes to, and what type of models they build. I think it's very hard to say at this point whether that will move the needle. But I think what John was saying mostly is that the money is lacking in our field when we're talking about emerging defense technologies. When you've existed for a little while as a company, you've done a Series A, you've done a Series B, and then people start turning around and saying, well, for this next round, we need a larger sum of money, we need some real commitment. And the reason that's very hard for a lot of companies is that any sane investor, whether it's a bank or a private person or a VC, will want to see a contract or two. I mean, they're not going to just give you the money because you've been so nice to them. And that's where, again, government comes in. If they want AI champions in defense, they need to actually buy their products so that investors know that at some point they're going to make money with this. Now, as Helsing, why did we manage to close rounds like that? Well, because we managed to get these contracts very early on in our journey, because we had the talent and we sort of didn't take no for an answer. But then, when it comes to the ethics questions, because you touched on that as well, John, I think we also need to ask ourselves the question, is it ethical to not just speed up trying to understand how these technologies can work for us and fielding them? Because just a very simple example of how this can make a difference for the life of the people that are meant to defend our country. We are on contract for electronic warfare on the Eurofighter. So I'm not going to bore you all with the technical details of that, but essentially it means that if you're the pilot and you're trying to understand where you are and what's going on around you, we help you understand your environment by analyzing the electromagnetic spectrum. Now, by us saying, oh, let's have this long ethical debate first, we're also saying, let's have the pilots, let them fly for a little bit longer without really knowing what's going on. That's fine. Let's have a debate first. Like, I'm obviously, oversimplifying here. I understand that, but I sometimes find oversimplification is necessary to get to the heart of a problem. We have an obligation to understand which of these technologies we can field quickly because they simply help with situational awareness and help our soldiers understand what the hell is going on around them. And which of these, and this is usually the ones where you have an effect on the battlefield, we need to think about very carefully how to keep the human in the loop and how we can do that.
Thank you, Charlotte. I think that's a great transition over to really talk a little bit more about ethics. There are, however, people who fear the consequences of putting too much AI into, for example, laws, lethal autonomous weapon systems, or some kind of other applications across the entire. I also learned that phrase the last days, kill chain. But to first start a little bit with the big picture, and you, Thorsten, strike me as a big picture guy. There are comparisons made to the nuclear arms race of the 70s and 80s to the current AI race. What is your take on this, and are there any lessons that we can draw from this past arms races, and to the one that is going on right now?
I really don't have anything smart to say on that. I'll leave that to Charlotte from a defense tech perspective, to compare that. But I want to go back to what you said in the beginning, because you asked me a question about Macron's big picture take on, indeed big picture, on AI. He wasn't talking about defense tech. There, I think we have a bit of a captive market with a single customer, and it's it's a little easier, hopefully. And I didn't say there's no talented people in Europe. We need lighthouse attractive projects like Helsing is an amazing success story. And we need more of them. But I think two things can be true. Your company can be an amazing success story, and you can have 400 extremely talented engineers and colleagues, and we can not be the most attractive place for the top talent building core AI. That was that's what Macron was talking about. So I think both things can be true at the same time, and we should celebrate our success stories. At the same time, we should kind of clearly see what the impediments are to fulfilling our potential in terms of being a leader in this field and attracting the best talent. It's good that von der Leyen announced these 200 billion. Hope they will be spent well, and that's a start. But I don't think it's fair to say, everything's great here. Things are great with your company, but it's still, you're measuring yourself up against Anduril, and that's not nothing, right? And Stackit is kind of comparing itself with Amazon Web Services, and these are good competitors. And if you take Macron by his word, we should be at the same level. I don't think we're exactly at the same level, although we have great companies that aspire to be there. And so I think both things can be true. You can be a great company doing great work, and hopefully, with a government client or government clients that make your life easier by quickly adopting the products, and we can have quite a bit of homework to do on the kind of general framework and condition, and to really fully realize our potential.
Moritz, can I respond to that, just briefly?
Briefly, yes.
Yes, very briefly. So definitely both can be true, although I will say breaking into defense is not easy either. And having a captive customer, I think is not quite what's going on, but we can have that discussion maybe a little bit later. All I'm saying is, yes, of course, we have some catching up to do, and yes, of course, there's things to change. All I'm saying is, let's not go in with this attitude of, oh my God, we're so far behind, it's so hard, what are we gonna do? But rather, we have talented people. Maybe they're currently not working for the companies we'd like them to work for, so let's change that, and maybe we don't have the regulatory environment that we need for companies to thrive, and we need to do something about it. I completely agree with you, and some of the regulation has gone just completely overboard, and I don't know how that happened, but if it happened, it can also be undone. And that's all I'm saying, that I would prefer some more optimism to come out of this MSC than from what I've seen so far.
That's a very good point, and we'll get to that later a little bit more. But Thorsten, I'm not letting you go here, by the way. The voices are increasing. Those who are comparing this to nuclear weapons, if it along the whole line, not only military AI, but also super intelligence and all kinds of huge models that we eventually can't control anymore, and so on and so forth, and even goes into other emerging technologies. So from a political science / international relations / security policy angle, what do you think about this comparison to the arms races of the past, and maybe generally the comparison to nuclear weapons? I mean,
thought about that so much, to be honest. So let us think this through together. That's not what I think about every day at all. And but first of all, what you said is true. We should, taking ourselves out of the ambition to have these weapons will not stop the race. I think we can safely assume that there are many powers around there, some not very well disposed toward us, that will aspire to have these type of weapons. And we really need to be specific what it then, which weapon systems it applies to, and which capabilities. So the nuclear arms race, the US had it first. And then for a while it was comfy. When the others had it, it got a little scarier. And I guess, what do you compare it to? You had arms control once, enough countries had it, and there was a concert of those who had it try to stop others from then accessing that technology, creating a club, a bit of a. So will there be an AI or whatever technology, sub-technology club that then has a nice apartheid regime? You can't have it. we can have it. I think diffusion may work a little more easily. I mean, let's see whether it can be controlled in that way or not. But for the comparison to work, you would have, you would need to have the good means to control it. I mean, the US is trying this with its AI diffusion rule. I mean, it's a bet on trying to at least slow down the diffusion and others from having access to those technologies. I think the jury is still out to what degree that can be done, but it's certain, most certain, it will be not necessarily a binary thing. You don't have the technology or you have it. And nuclear, it's kind of clear. You either have a nuclear weapon with a capability to launch it and launch a nuclear weapon, or you don't. I haven't thought it through to the end what the analogy is, but things might not be as binary. So I'm a little skeptical of fully buying into that comparison. And also the question is who will get there first, and or they will to have to really have the analogy working with the nuclear stuff. But I'm sure there's somewhere in Survival or some other magazine, there's a really smart article that I just haven't looked for, but this is really not my core expertise, so forgive me for, walking you through this. Yeah, maybe you can enlighten us on how you see that analogy.
John, go for it.
Can I just come in? So I think you can make credible cases to be kind of super techno-optimistic or super pessimistic. It's quite easy to build credible cases either way. It's also quite easy to come up with attention-grabbing things around AGI or killer robots or everything else. I'm broadly optimistic, but I do think when you look at and it's not around AI itself, I think it's when you combine AI with other technologies. That's when I think you get to some really, really complex challenges around things like AI and biotech, which is exactly where we want to go in terms of pharmaceuticals, because you're unlocking new drugs, et cetera, but you're also potentially creating some extremely dangerous agents. So almost everything that we want to do on the positive, there's a kind of equally compelling negative that you come to it. AI and information warfare. I mean, there are multiple ways you can come up with these sort of horrific scenarios. I think what is different compared to things like the nuclear arms race is that it's quite democratized. The barriers to entry are very low. To build a nuclear weapon is a seriously complex engineering task, which very few people can do, let alone accessing the components. To combine AI technologies and bioengineering, for example, the barriers to entry are pretty low. To reassure people, these are the really live debates in government at all levels. And I think we have one of our staff, her specific role is around responsible use, and she works with our startups around responsible use, whether it's on AI, whether it's on whatever the issue, and she's absolutely locked into the NATO team as well, because this is taken incredibly seriously in there. As I say, my point is I think we need to have a genuinely considered debate around it and not leap to the margins of it, which I'm not sure are terribly helpful.
Thank you, John. We already touched upon speed, and I think speed versus ethics has been also probably a little bit of a question for Helsing. I mean, speed is what we've seen from Helsing over the last years. Founded in, I think, March 2021, and now where the company is. Charlotte, for you, the question: how can companies like Helsing, deep tech, military AI startups ensure that the ethics is sufficiently taken into consideration while maintaining the speed in development, while really doing what you did over the last years?
That's an excellent question. I will first say that I don't think there has been a speed versus ethics debate. There's always been speed and ethics, and frankly, no at least no democracy, which is the only clients that we accept, would buy a product that, and I think John can attest to that, that doesn't abide by the doctrines of the military using it. In that sense, it's actually, in a way, it's easy for us currently to know what we can and cannot do. But, and that's the huge but that I think John was also referring to, this technology is developing at an incredible pace, and in a short amount of time, things will be possible with this technology that under current doctrine and current ethical guidelines of our militaries are not covered. So an easy example that I think everyone has at some point read about in the news is this idea of drone saturation attacks, that you have whole swarms of drones that are AI enabled and that may even be programmed to find their own targets and not have a human in the loop, and to simply be allowed to make decisions, if you can call it that. We're not there yet, but we can expect that the technology will at some point probably be able to do that, and we need to figure out here how to deal with that, both in terms of what that means for us, what are we allowed, or what should we be building, what should we be fielding, and also how do we defend from that.
Thank you, Charlotte. I would get ready to take a couple of your questions in a moment. So maybe we already have. Do we already have a microphone? Let's just have a look. If you guys here in the audience, if you already have questions, now would be a good moment for the first round. I think we have a question here. The gentleman in the front, I think, was first. Please state your name, maybe institution, and then go for it.
Well, should I stand up?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Please do.
Well, my name is Flössler Christoph. I'm from Austria, so from a neutral country, as far as things are going. And since the question was, is AI comparable to the race with nuclear arms, I would say something different. It's probably comparable to the race between aircraft carriers and battleships, like in the First and Second World War. By now, a computer can stop an aircraft carrier with such a little device, and it's basically useless. So I would rather compare it with these things. But I would have actually two questions. Seeing the current development in 2029, if that's not too far away from our yet standpoint, the European Union has introduced for the very first time in its existence a commissioner for defense. What would you consider basically a successful work of that person from the current situation we are in? And my second question is particularly to the guy from the United Kingdom. Since we have a new reality at the European continent since early 2020, would you see defense as the foot of the UK back in Europe's door?
Thank you. John, do you want to start? We go backwards.
Yeah, so if I can't, because obviously we're not part, so I will comment on the what I would like a senior commissioner for defence, irrespective of where they were, where they would be helpful, and I think that's around reconstituting our defence industrial base, a different base which supports the sorts of capabilities we're going to need in the future, and to bring that to life. So in World War II, we took sewing machine factories and made Spitfires, or the equivalents. I'd love to know what, from 2029 onwards, what that looks like, because I think it looks like additive manufacturing. I think it looks like modular capabilities. I think it looks like software enablement. So, but that requires a fundamental change to the way our defence industries work, because we've got defence industries that are used to generating a relatively small number of exquisite platforms that are pretty much impossible to replace at pace, partly because they're just so complicated to build, but also because once they've done their run, they kind of shut them down, and that's the end of it. So I think it's instructive to look at what's happening in Ukraine. What does the Ukrainian industrial base look like? In some cases, it looks like a load of people sat at home putting together drone kits in their houses in a distributed factory, effectively, and then they're pulling those together, and they're being iterated on daily, weekly basis, because they're being software updated because of electronic warfare or whatever else. So to me, that would be the most significant contribution that a senior in whatever structure, I think that's where you'd make the most difference. The UK, so I'm going to slightly avoid your question. The UK sees it one of the absolute central planks, and I'm not a UK person now, so to be clear, I'm not UK government anymore, but it sees a central plank is its role in NATO. And NATO remains at least as important as it has ever been. And I think that's our bridge into Europe.
Thorsten.
I think you never left on defense terms, right? So I think I wouldn't exaggerate the effects of Brexit on defense terms. I mean, when the Ukraine war or when Russia's invasion hit, it was the UK that was there in a big way. And I think the UK will also be there with Europe in this European pillar of NATO. And so you don't even have to return, you just have to stay where you are and push harder alongside us, because we also need to push harder.
Thank you, Thorsten. Just quickly, because I didn't, there was a first part to that question. There was a first part to that question, because we not only talked about the UK being part of this. Can you, what do you guys? That was on the that was on the commissioner, and okay. So if you can. All right.
I will not go into another.
Let's take one more question in this round, and then I think we had the gentleman here who was for, yeah.
It may be quick. I'm a Canadian who used to work in US politics many years ago, so I don't speak for any government, but I live in Ukraine. So drones are at my window, so very existential, as it should be for Europe. I'm wondering whether, probably it's true that there's a brain drain. If you have AI specialists, they would choose to work in democratic societies versus dictatorship societies. Is this correct? So is that true? Second of all, is this an argument for people like, I don't know, the techno oligarchs that be, you know, the Musks and the, I don't know what you call those people, the Peter Thiel and, you know, who are affecting American policy and Trump policy? Is that an argument for them? Hey, if you want to stay ahead of the AI race, stay with the democratic countries, not the axis of evil, to be honest. And where else is it? And how do you stop the brain drain, like accessing Helsing, people who can steal your intellectual property, you know, for the deep seas of the world?
Thank you. Thank you. For the first question, I would go over to you, Charlotte, maybe.
I'm just not entirely sure whether I understood the question, so let me just rephrase it and then see if that's what you meant. You were wondering how we can make sure that people who work at Helsing then don't go out and give their knowledge sort of to other countries. Is that correct? Or stolen. Okay, right. So first of all, in terms of IP, there's obviously a very strict regulatory environment around that. So if any of the people who work for us wanted to do that, that would be severely illegal. So that's a relatively good reason for most to stop. But obviously also there is a ton of classification moduses that you have to go through to even be allowed anywhere near that data. So a defense company you can't just walk into Helsing and then, start a computer and there it is, right? So there's actually, you need, well, how do you say, Geheimschutz, and like a secret sort of...
Secrecy protection.
Yeah, secrecy protection. You're under a lot of like official obligations where the people that are allowed to actually come close to the relevant technology are screened. Clearance, exactly. So there's a ton of clearance and compliance and stuff that I think in defense tech you're probably least likely to have that problem because it's such a super regulated environment. I don't know, John, if you...
Yeah, I'll pick up on one additional point, which is on how you make sure, because I think it's really important, we take this very, very seriously, is how you make sure that people are not investing in companies from countries where you don't want this to happen. So we are very, very careful when we're doing our due diligence on our portfolio companies that their cap tables, so the people who put money in there already, don't contain money from adversarial states. Because again, this is the way, and you've seen this particularly from China, of making investments into these companies and getting insight into the technology through their seats on boards, et cetera, et cetera. So we are very, very careful about that. And I think that's really important. That's why you need this capital. Because if you put your yourself in the seat of a founder who is, they've built their company for a couple of years, they've got an amazing product, and their runway is starting to run out, and they don't have the cash to keep it going. If you then find yourself being approached by someone who says, hey, I've got a few million, I'll just keep you running on, it would be very tempting to take that money. And we spend a lot of time with them advising why. Be very careful where that money's coming from, because it's not always the money that you want in your cap table.
That's very interesting. Also, I think we touched upon the whole brain drain thing a little bit here right now with talents maybe going over there. I think that there's a second thing, Thorsten. Many people think that authoritarian systems, just by the way their systems work, are faster in the development and maybe application of emerging technologies. And so we lose a race just because we are democracies and they're not, and they can be faster in some ways. Is that actually, like, could you comment on that? Is that actually something that we can observe, looking at China, for example, or is that an urban legend, or is that really not showing much?
I always thought we used to believe the opposite, that only open societies could ultimately be at the frontier of technological development. That's, I think our chancellor, current chancellor, still believes that China will ultimately be stuck in the middle income trap, and that the open society model is superior to that of an authoritarian model. And I have to say I'm agnostic, and I think we need to be in terms of, you know, tech competition, but also in our industrial competition, I'm agnostic. I wouldn't say per se it's impossible for an authoritarian state capitalist model, because we haven't seen that combination at that level before. There's very few historical comparisons. The Soviet Union in the end never achieved that status, and it was never so enmeshed with the West and our countries in technology and in trade. So we're in a new situation where I don't think we have historical precedents. I wouldn't, you know, the default setting I think would usually have been, you know, it's only us who can really remain at the frontier. I would say it's open. I thought the Chinese leadership shot itself a little bit in the foot by taking away some of the freedom they had given to the tech sector to innovate, that had done incredible things, but then, you know, the party leadership decided that, you know, the control of the party was more important than having that extra bit of technological advancement. But that doesn't mean that, you know, that it's ultimately unsuccessful. I think the jury is still out, and we need to plan for the relative success of Chinese competitors, and need to assume that, and can't lean back. But I don't think we can assume that they're necessarily superior. I mean, it's clear. And the US doesn't seem particularly held back. And I think if we kind of do whatever you know, set out in defense tech, or in what you're doing, you know, you have all the plans, ideas, and so on for us to really advance on this. So I think both systems can be successful. They can also be, both systems can be their best enemies, as she said, you know, as the Chinese party state or party chairman kind of demonstrated with his crackdown on some of the tech sector, and as we demonstrate by kind of shooting ourselves in the foot or in the knee every once in a while, and making sure we don't achieve our potential.
John, you grab the mic.
So a couple of bits. I think maybe I'm a bit old-fashioned on this, because I do believe that we've got an advantage, genuinely. I think the ability to have porous boundaries between academia, industry, government, and venture finance, to be able to kind of, for people and ideas to flow around there. That's how Silicon Valley came to life. I mean, the untold story of Silicon Valley is, of course, that was the defense industrial base. That was set up in the 40s to do radars and proximity fusing and all sorts of stuff like that. And from that was born the amazing things, the technologies that we all take for granted today. So something around that. I think almost more importantly, though, is a kind of cultural trait. And I think at the heart of it is the willingness to take risk and not be afraid of the consequences. That's where I think we do have an advantage, because I'm not sure if you're an entrepreneur in China that you are as comfortable with taking risks as you probably are if you're working in Silicon Valley or in Munich.
Charlotte, first of all, do comment on what we just talked about, but then also the question, one reason why, for example, with, let's say, China, people are making that argument is because, for example, there are no data protection laws, maybe, or as sophisticated as they are here. Many AI systems build a lot on data, require a lot of data. So the question is whether the European data regulation is one example of where this is a hurdle, and where it appears that data usage is subject to these comprehensive regulation in Europe. And are these regulations really a chance for Europe to pivot, or rather than the hurdle? Because last comment, the European Union states the data protection as something where the EU can capitalize on in its approach. And I found this a little bit to be interesting.
I don't really dare to give a full answer on that, because frankly, if you're working in defense, data protection is very, very different than it is in the civil sector.
Yeah, right.
So by nature of most of the data being classified, so it's in a whole different ballgame anyway. And also, even if you're not looking to get access to data that your own government holds, often you're looking to get data that other government holds, battlefield data that you need. That's also scarce. It's not like, I'll give a very, very oversimplified example again. If you're trying to understand exactly what the newest model of a Russian tank looks like, and the type of camouflage it uses, it is most likely that you can't just go download that from the internet, and that they will have security in place to try and stop you from getting that data. So just to clarify, I'm not, when it comes to data protection, I think somebody like Thorsten maybe is in a better place to answer that question. When it comes to China, an argument, again, that I'm not willing to have a firm opinion on yet, that people make to me in defense tech is that China probably has it easier in defense tech because the Chinese government can just overrule whatever industrial or procurement processes are in place and just go, no, buy that thing because we like it. I've lived in China for 3 years. I learned the language. I did a lot of research on the ground on political activism. It was one of the reasons why I now so fervently strive to defend democracies. I spent so much time there. And my experience is that there is a story about China, and then there's the real China. And I don't think there is a Chinese system. I think it's a hugely complex country and a hugely complex government. And there is no such thing as that answer being better or that. So I think, again, we don't need to worry about there being a superior governance system out there. I think we should just improve an already pretty good system we have.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thorsten?
Can I say two things, because you like controversy on the panel? What not against. I agree that there's many realities, and I'm not a sinologist. My colleague Florian is. He's in the audience, so ask him on the many realities. What you said on the porous boundaries sounded a bit like civil-military fusion to me. The idea, and so I don't think we have necessarily a unique advantage there. They're shooting themselves in the foot by kind of maybe not allowing enough academic freedom but in terms of really having this porousness, in Germany at least, many scientists are not particularly gung-ho to actually work with at least traditionally, with companies like Helsing and work with the defense industry. So I wouldn't be so sure. And when you said like entrepreneurs don't take risks, I think look at the electric vehicle story over the past 10, 15 years. The Chinese government decided that this would be a leapfrog technology where they saw a chance to actually outpace us, or like to actually be leaders in that technology, and that it wouldn't happen with traditional combustion engines. And they threw a lot of money at it, and I think lots of companies were able to experiment, take risk. You know, look at the crazy diversity of companies that emerged in the early days. I think all these entrepreneurs are taking risk, and they have access to the capital to take those risks. So I wouldn't necessarily bet on you know, if you look at where the German car industry is right now, and what it did over the past 10 years on electric mobility, and where the Chinese car industry is on that, I wouldn't necessarily say the Chinese don't take risks and they're not good at innovation. Doesn't mean that, you know, our system can't do that as well. As Charlotte said, we need to, you know, not change our system toward a more authoritarian one. We just need to improve our system, and you know, their system may be successful or unsuccessful on its own account, but I'm personally quite agnostic. Both systems can apparently produce good results, as we've kind of seen over the past decades.
I think a very good point that you just made, Thorsten, is that we have to just simply improve the system. The European Union's digital chief, Henna Virkkunen, also promised, quote, that the bloc will simplify its rules, bloc the European Union, and implement them in a business-friendly way, end of quote. A question for both of you, Charlotte and John. What would you expect from the EU in order to really make the implementation in a business-friendly way? Charlotte, you can go first.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. Again, like EU regulation, if I understand correctly, that's what it's about right now, has not that much effect on defense. But even hearing anybody saying business friendly, that's a change of tone from the last 10 years from the EU, so that's good. So let's see.
John.
I have nothing to add to that, I'm afraid. No, it's not. I wouldn't pretend to be an expert on EU business regulation.
Well, we will go for another round of questions. I see a gentleman here. Maybe, yeah.
Hi, my name is Cornelius. I just had a quick question. I believe that there is a consensus on stage to improve the system that we already have, but at the same time, there needs to be a necessity to keep up with the pace because legislation is not keeping up with the speed of technology. Do you believe that there is a necessity to have a multinational or multilateral agreement on ethics and what systems are allowed, such as saws or the drones that were mentioned before, or is that a hindrance to innovation?
Thank you for that question. Who wants to go?
No, I think there should definitely be, if we can, find international regulations on systems like that. I think that's almost a no-brainer, that ideally we want to agree what is and isn't okay. I think we've done that on other weapon systems, and we've in some areas very successfully. If not my complete area of expertise looking at that historically, but I think it's a good idea, and I think it doesn't really have that much to do with innovation. I think regulating a potentially dangerous technology is not a bad thing. That's why I keep making this point when it comes to defense AI. It should be regulated. It's the right push, and we do need to keep up with the pace. Right now, I think it's more a matter of using the innovation that's already out there and putting it to good use for our military. That I think is more the challenge right now for Western countries than really regulating it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. So it's got to be a multilateral approach because it doesn't work if you just do it kind of unilaterally. I suppose the other side of it, though, is in support of the innovation, as the other multilateral thing you need to do is to standardise. And this is something that NATO has historically been incredibly good at. I remember back in the days of STANAGs, which set regulation. They regulated the dimensions of things and the frequencies they operated on, so that you could bring together a force from across NATO and it will be able to operate as one. That's an area which is, I think, really important to innovation, because standardizing your architectures allows you to then plug and play different capabilities, and it's something we've slightly lost our way on, and I think there's a lot of work now going on in NATO to rebuild those standards. So I think it's a kind of combination of, yes, on regulating around on those sort of regulations, but also on standardization. I think that's really important.
Thank you to both of you. Do we have another question in the audience for this round? Yeah, I saw someone else in the back. Name, maybe institution, and then the question.
Hey, my name is Moritz. I'm with the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. I first have maybe one quick comment on the AI and nuclear weapons kind of analogy. I think that kind of originated from the U.S. Congress, actually, that mentioned a Manhattan-like project in a commission report in end of 2024. So I just thought there was an interesting note. My question, though, is on something different. And we talked a lot about like the race in AI and like closing the gap, and my question is around closing the gap responsibly. So I just came back from the AI Action Summit in Paris, and we felt like safety and security topics were kind of sidelined a bit at the summit. So like, especially as Mr. Ridge raised like dual use concerns and capabilities, for example, about biotechnology that could propagate capabilities for bio and chemical weapons to malevolent individuals, terrorists, etc. I think these could cause pretty like serious large-scale harms. My question would be, what can the broader kind of more general AI field learn from how defense AI and defense AI tech is being developed safe and secure without slowing down innovation?
Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to kick off. I mean, it's not going to be a particularly good answer, I'm afraid. I'll say that up front. My worry with taking defense and using that as the basis from which to build out further things is we just are not using it properly yet. So it's behind. We're not able to integrate these things into our capabilities fast enough. So I think if you wait to learn your lessons from their application in the defense environment, you're probably not moving fast enough. I want to change that, and that's the reason I'm doing the job I'm doing, and the reason I was the innovation director in the MOD previously, is I want to change that. I want defense to be at the cutting edge, like we have been previously, where we've acted as the vanguard for many of these capabilities, because in some cases, and the reason that works, and this is why dual use is such a smart concept, is we will often be prepared to put very large amounts of money to achieve a very small advantage, because it could be a strategic advantage for us as a nation or as an organization. And sometimes that's the money that's required to nudge a technology a little bit further along the road to the point where it's then mature enough to be exploited for its commercial use case. So that's why dual use is a really powerful model of advancing these technologies. Just don't wait for AI regulation. Don't rely on defense being right at the vanguard. I think it's got some really interesting edge cases which allow you to get to some really difficult ethical discussions, but I don't think I'm not sure I would want it being the kind of driver, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I would agree with that. I think what we can learn maybe from AI and defense tech for Europe, especially when it comes to closing the gap, is that Helsing partly was successful because we have a very clear mission focus. We do only AI for defense. We do nothing else. We're not a dual use company. And I think that's also where potentially more European use cases for AI might lie. And because maybe the race for LLMs is over, but there's a lot more AI innovation to come. So, sorry, I realize that doesn't answer your question, but I think that's maybe also an important point to make when it comes to closing the gap, that we are an example of sort of a vertical for AI where we have been very successful, and I think they're further out there that young people like you should found companies in and make Europe successful.
Thorsten, do you also want to comment on that question, or you pass? Okay. Before we go in the last round of questions, if you have any, allow a last round here also for us on stage. we started with President Macron. We'll end with President Macron. He also said that on the weekend we need an AI agenda. And then in the same interview with CNN, it was also a little bit about military AI. So I think that this is included, but also generally. And he said because we have to bridge that gap. What would you like to see on this agenda from your perspectives? Like, what is maybe the most important thing to do to bridge that gap as a final round here right now for all of us on stage?
The thing I would say about an agenda is it needs to be short and it needs to have really focused effort. The danger, because these are such enormous issues, and I've seen this in previous jobs, you end up with enormous lists of initiatives and everything's a priority and nothing gets the resource. And usually the resource is not money, it's brain power and kind of human effort to drive these agendas forward. So I'm not going to opine on what should be in the agenda itself, but it should have some very clear, focused things to do and not too many of them. And then you've got a chance of making some real headway.
Thanks, John. Charlotte?
I will only add that in my experience, people should only put something on their agenda that they themselves can actually change without having to rely on getting round tables together of other potential stakeholders and all of that. So additionally to it being short, politicians should put on their agenda what a politician can change. They can still talk about industry and so forth, but then the industry just needs to move themselves, and responsibility should lie where responsibility ultimately is in changing things.
Thanks, Charlotte. Thorsten, do you want to add anything?
I mean, I align with what Charlotte said earlier, optimism, funnily enough, but it needs to be begründeter optimism. So optimism that is backed by, real efforts, real means, real capabilities to actually achieve the things you're excited about and optimistic about achieving. And I think that kind of spirit may not be the worst thing to have.
Thank you, Thorsten. The view goes out to you in the audience. Do you have, are there any more questions that we have from the audience? I see none. It's pretty late. It's pretty late. It's been a long day for some of you here, I think, till 10 or something. Thank you very much. Please, first, a round of applause for our panelists. I want to again thank the America House for hosting us. I want to thank the Friedrich Naumann Stiftung for their support in organizing this event. And there's only one thing left for me to say. Please do go on youngsecurityconference.com, find more about what we do. We have annual conferences, as over the last 5 years. We helped over 160 fellows going to Munich and discussing these and other topics here in Munich, getting a couple of young voices into the debate. And with that, thank you very much. Have a great evening and see you next time. Thanks.